Okay, so we are back. This is about as clean as this thing's going to get. Has a nice even finish. You obviously can't see this, but if you run your hand over your chemically clean stock, it'll feel kind of rough. Also, we're going to be dealing with a beech stock, which is on the stock itself. This looks like a walnut possibly, because the color is actually different. Once I knock the grain down, it should be a little different. With a beech stock, you need to compress the wood fibers or boning it. You can use a piece of bamboo, piece of bone. I use the end of a paintbrush handle, and actually what I generally do is take a very fine sanding block, and this is the only time I condone sanding. I'm sure I'll get flamed on it, but that's okay. And I very lightly sand to knock down the grain. It kind of, all the raised up whiskers from the water and the chemicals, actually will go away, and it gives it a very beautiful, very fine finish surface that's ready to be finished. I don't use Minwax. I used to. Nothing wrong with Minwax, but I use leather dyes now. Popular ones are Fiebings, Fiebings. You can find them on eBay for about $5, $5 or $6 for like I think a 4-ounce jar delivered. I like them because it cuts through alcohol. It cuts through pretty much any impurities that may be left on the stock and gives you a beautiful finish. This actually looks like it may be a walnut because I'm not seeing the little cuts in the wood. Of course, this could be also since this wood is very light, meaning that there's no finish left in it, or there's no color, no oil left in it, that this thing actually is pretty much as bone dry as it gets. And very lightly, some people will do this with steel wool as well. They'll raise the whiskers and then knock it down. And you basically just sand it, not to go crazy. You can get in here if you want. It's kind of anal retentive because that's going to be covered by part of the handguard. I generally don't do those areas. I try to do as little sanding as possible. The paintbrush actually serves two purposes. Actually, this is in fact a beech handguard because you can't see it now, but there's little like little half moons in the wood. So with beech, it tends to take stain unevenly. You can use a pre-stained stock conditioner, a wood conditioner. That stuff works okay. What actually works better is if you take a hard surface, preferably something similar. Helps you get a paintbrush with no paint on it. And you're basically running it over, and you can see it gets a little bit of a shiny finish, but it actually compresses the wood, and it compresses it to where when you put the stain, you will get a nice, beautiful, even stain finish. So you're boning this thing completely, and you can maybe see the difference. This is a little shinier, this is a little dull. You know, and you don't have to go too crazy because you're not going to really get that much, but you're basically just compressing the wood fibers down so that way when you lay the stain on top, you won't get that horrible blotchy appearance. I know a lot of Mosin stocks will have birch or beech wood stocks. If you've ever tried to use a Minwax stain, it doesn't take the stain very evenly, and you end up with kind of a hideous looking color that looks like it's just very light and dark. Looks kind of unprofessional in my opinion. Granted, I've done some that after you've boned them and compressed the wood fibers, you do still get the light and dark, but it actually looks nicer. But it's more often than not, I've seen some that look like shit more than they look like anything else. So with this one, I'm going to compress it really good. We're almost done. And then I'm going to use Fiebings leather dye. And I'm going to dye this, or stain it, and then I'm going to top coat it, and then we're going to make the rest of the stock match. This is really, really nice and tight now. This is about as good as it gets, I think. And the wood is like perfect. I'll probably hit this area a little bit more. It's a tad bit rough, so sometimes if it's a little rough, I'll hit it with a little bit of sandpaper and then bone it again. Ideally, when you're sanding, you do not want to round off any edges. If you notice, I'm sort of trying to sand with the ridge so I don't damage the ridge at all. The mark of a poorly sanded stock is a lot of the fullers, the hand the grooves and whatnot being rounded off because of too aggressive sanding. So this is good. I'm going to wipe this down real good and then get the leather dye and do the next step. Okay, so we have our handguard that's been chemically cleaned. It's been sanded and it's been boned. Wear gloves for this. This stuff is pretty, it's not noxious in any way, but it gets everywhere and it's stained, so you'll end up with the orange hands. What you're going to do is you're going to lay a coat of the color on. I'm actually using a Phoebing's tan. Just get a little bit of these wool daubers. Again, you can get on eBay. I get everything on eBay, as you can tell. Sometimes if you want to test a color, you can just kind of run it on the inside. And what I'm looking to actually do is replicate the color of the wood as it looked from as natural. You know, sometimes you will have to do this to get handguards to match or stocks to match because a lot of them were made with dissimilar woods. So you don't need a lot. A little bit kind of goes a long way, but you just do a nice long even strokes. The wood is soaking it up nicely, especially because we boned it and we kind of compressed the fibers. If you don't compress the fibers on certain types of wood, you will get light and dark spots. If you do, don't completely panic. Let it soak in, because sometimes the wood will soak the stain in at different rates. This thing is bone-ass dry after being boned. So this is, you can see the difference in color. It's actually going to lighten up. What I love about this is this grain in the wood. I don't know if you can see it, possibly. So what I usually do is I will lay a color down and let it soak in for a minute and then wipe it off with a clean rag. If I'm satisfied with the color, I'll just leave it, let it dry for about an hour or so, and then you can put the top coat of your choice. You know, this is alcohol dyes, so you can put everything from oil to, you know, if you want to put a Danish oil on top of it, totally up to you. Obviously, if you put a colored finish, it's going to change the color a little bit, depending on the color that you use. Let me just get it getting thick in there because no one's going to really see this, but it's just a mark of doing an efficient job. Again, I don't know if you can see this, but as you can see, you can like these little sort of half moon rings right up in there, and that's a mark of a beech stock. It's just the wood grain coming through. The other thing also to keep in mind is that when you are doing this, let it dry thoroughly. You know, usually 30 minutes to let it soak in. This will actually get kind of light. Now the thing you also have to factor in is the top coat you're going to apply is actually going to darken this up. So if this is nice and light and you're content with this, but you want to go a shade darker, don't put any more dye on it. Just let it soak in real good, and then put your top coat, because your top coat will actually add some darkness to this. In this case, we discussed with the client more of a reddish brown. He wants that kind of rich walnut looking color, so we're going to lay one more coat of the Phoebing's, and generally when it's wet it gives you kind of an idea of how it's going to look. If you put too many coats, you can actually wipe some of it off. You can scrub some of it off with like a 3M scouring pad lightly. You can even use acetone. So in this case, I'm just going to let this one soak in just for a couple seconds and then start wiping it off. And you can see how this stuff gets everywhere, so definitely wear some gloves. It's not poisonous. I don't think so. It's not poisonous enough to where I'm going to worry about it, but stuff just gets everywhere and it sticks to everything, which means you're going to have orange hands if you're using a brown dye. The thing with these is that the color also will react differently to the wood. For example, there's a color called British Tan. It's good for Arisaka rifles. It has that dark orange that was found on many of the early Koishikawa and Kokura rifles. This is a tan color. This gives obviously a nice brownish orange color. There is a russet color, which is more brown, which you want like more of a walnut. There is a color called light brown that has actually tones of red in it that will come close to replicating the color found on Garand and Springfield stock, similar to the chestnuts. I think it's called chestnut ridge stock stain or something, and it has that sort of reddish finish. You don't have to leave this out in the sun to dry. Just leave it in a dry place for a good hour or so. The alcohol soaks up right away, and the stain soaks into the wood right away, so you don't have to really worry about you know, drying time. Minwax, I think the minimum drying time is 2 hours possibly, because you have to let the carrier oils kind of evaporate. With this, you can almost rework it right now, but I like to see how much it soaks in. If you get some light spots, you might be able to see this is a bit of a light spot here. You can actually just touch up that one area, you know, let it soak in for a sec, and then blend it as best you can. And over time, it'll actually start to kind of take on the color of the wood across the board. So yeah, when we come back, we'll double check this, and then we will do a polyurethane top coat and call it a day, and then work on the stock itself. Something also you can see, the Egyptians were not known for their stock finishing, and you can actually, if you look, you can possibly see that there is some sanding marks from the belt sanders that they used to shape these things. It's going to be your choice if you want to sand those things out. Again, there's little nicks and stuff. This gun's is 50 years old roughly, so I don't see a need to make this thing pristine. It's not a beautiful Weatherby rifle, it's a battle rifle, and I don't believe in putting finishes on that would take away from that battle rifle status. Before you put your top coat, you can come in with a light scouring pad, like a 3M pad, a scuff pad, just to kind of rough it up a little bit. It'll kind of even the finish, and you can also use that in between your poly coats if that's a top coat you choose. I like to use poly satin, wipe it on, let it soak in real good, and then I'll hit it with an actual spray can polyurethane that kind of builds coats faster. In between coats, about 2 hours, I'll scuff it down real good. After I'm done scuffing, After I'm done scuffing, let it dry again, put another coat until I get the sheen and the finish I want. Typically, I'll want this thing to be very satiny, almost flat, like a natural wood color actually would be. So once you get that done, you can work on the stock and any other parts. You know, like I said, let it dry in the sun and then come back, and then when it's ready to go, put your top coat and finish it up with the top coat dry for a couple of weeks, and you can wax it. The gun can go back together once the top coat's dry, usually in about 24 hours. But I would try to avoid excessive handling, only because sometimes the top coats can be a little temperamental, especially if you're shooting an AK-47 or a gas-operated semi-auto that throws off a lot of heat. You know, here's a gas valve in here, so this area gets very black with just gas coming off, which is why the wood in this area is so thick. So anyway, like I said, we'll come back, we'll double check the finish, and then hit it with the polyurethane and go from there.